you ever been in a conversation and felt suddenly a cold flash of exposure? Not because you said something wrong, not because anyone accused you of anything, just a moment, a look, a pause, a shift in the atmosphere, and you knew with a certainty that bypassed all rational thought that someone had seen something in you that you had not intended to show, something you had been keeping carefully out of view, something that, even now, even as an adult, even in a life that is largely under your own control, you still do not feel safe allowing to be visible. That thing has a name, and the name is not shameful. It is not a diagnosis. It is not evidence of damage or defect. It is the most human thing in the world, the thing that every single person alive is carrying, in one form or another, in one layer or another, and that almost no one has ever had a language for. The depth tradition calls it the shadow, and the shadow is not what you think it is, because the version of the shadow that gets discussed on the internet, the toxic parts, the dark impulses, the things you are ashamed of, is only the surface of it. The real shadow goes much deeper, and the deeper you go, the more surprising it becomes. Because buried in the shadow alongside the things you are ashamed of is something else entirely. Something that was not exiled because it was bad. Something that was exiled because it was too much. This video is about that something. About the parts of you that were never supposed to be seen. Not because they are wrong, but because the world you grew up in did not have room for them. And about what happens to those parts when they are exiled. Where they go. What they do from there. And why the life you are living right now, with all its patterns and repetitions and mysterious resistances, cannot be fully understood without understanding the shadow that has been running it from underneath. Let's begin at the beginning, which is childhood, because the shadow always begins in childhood. Not because childhood is uniquely traumatic, though it sometimes is, but because childhood is the period during which the self is being formed, and the self cannot be formed without the material of the environment shaping it. And no environment, however loving, can receive every part of a child without editing. The editing is not malicious. The editing is simply what happens when a particular, complex, specific little person encounters a particular, limited, specific environment that can only hold so much. Think about what a child actually is. A child is the full human range in miniature. A child contains anger and gentleness, greed and generosity, cruelty and tenderness, wild imagination and sober attention, the need to destroy and the need to create, sexuality in its earliest forms, the full spectrum of human darkness and the full spectrum of human light. All of it is present. All of it is real. All of it is the child. And the environment, the family, the school, the culture, the religion, the economic circumstances encounters this full range and does what environments always do. It rewards some of it and punishes the rest. It welcomes some of it and turns cold to the rest. It names some of it good and some of it bad, some of it acceptable and some of it not, some of it us and some of it not us. And the child, who needs the environment's warmth to survive, learns quickly and efficiently which parts are welcome and which parts must go. The parts that must go, they do not disappear. This is the essential thing, the thing that changes everything once you understand it. The parts that must go are not eliminated. They are relocated. They are moved out of the visible social self, the self that interfaces with the world, and into a part of the psyche that the visible self cannot directly access. They are exiled into the shadow, and in the shadow, cut off from conscious awareness, cut off from the updating that conscious experience provides, cut off from the growth and integration that the rest of the personality undergoes as the person ages. They remain exactly as they were on the day they were exiled, frozen at the age of exile, waiting. If something in this is beginning to land, take 1 second now and subscribe to this channel. The work we do here is the inner work, the layer beneath the surface self, the place where the exiled parts live and wait and run your life without your knowledge. Subscribe and hit the bell. Now let's go deeper, because the part about what the exiled parts do from the shadow is the most important part, and almost no one has told it to you clearly. Here is what the exiled parts do. They do not sit quietly in the dark. Nothing alive sits quietly in the dark. They find ways to express themselves, because expression is the nature of psychic energy. It moves, it seeks outlet, it manifests. But they cannot express themselves directly, because the conscious self has exiled them and will not allow direct expression. So they express themselves indirectly, through the body, through the dream, through projection, through the recurring pattern, through the inexplicable reaction that arrives fully formed and departs leaving only aftermath, through the relationship that you enter again and again in different costumes but always the same script, through the impulse that appears at exactly the worst moment and does exactly the worst thing and leaves you sitting in the rubble afterward wondering, again, who that was. The shadow is not one thing. It is a collection of exiles, each with its own history, its own charge, its own way of finding expression in the indirect language that the unconscious is forced to use when the conscious door is closed. And the collection is, in every person without exception, far larger and far stranger than the person imagines. Because the shadow receives not only the parts that were explicitly rejected, the anger, the neediness, the sexuality, the grandiosity, the cruelty, but also the parts that were simply not seen. The parts that the environment had no category for. The parts that were too complex or too unfamiliar or too inconvenient for the people around you to receive. The parts that simply fell through the cracks of the environment's ability to hold a complete human being. And here, right here, is where the story takes the turn that most people never reach. Because what falls through the cracks is not only the dark material. What falls through the cracks is also the light. The capacities that were too large for the environment to accommodate. The intelligence that made the people around you uncomfortable. The sensitivity that was labeled weakness. The vision that was labeled impractical. The wildness that was labeled dangerous. The depth that was labeled difficult. The creativity that was labeled useless. The leadership that was labeled arrogance. All of this goes into the shadow too, not because it is bad, but because the environment that was supposed to receive it could not. And in the shadow, alongside the anger and the shame and the buried impulses, sits a treasury of unlived potential that most people spend their entire lives projecting onto other people and calling it admiration. Think about the people you have admired most in your life. Not celebrities, not abstract figures, the specific people who, when you encountered them, produced in you a feeling that was something between inspiration and longing and something that almost hurt. The person whose courage made you feel both elevated and slightly diminished. The person whose freedom produced in you a feeling that you could not quite name. The person whose creativity made you hungry in a way that had nothing to do with envy of their success and everything to do with recognition of something that felt familiar and inaccessible at the same time. What you were recognizing was not their quality. You were recognizing your own quality in them. You were looking at something that was in you, that had been in you all along, that had been exiled into your shadow because the original environment could not hold it, and you were experiencing it outside of yourself in someone who had managed to live it, and the feeling was the feeling of your own exiled material recognizing itself in a mirror. The depth tradition has a name for this specific form of shadow material. It is called the golden shadow. And the golden shadow is, in many ways, the more urgent work. Not because the dark material is unimportant, it is critically important and we will come back to it, but because the dark material at least produces symptoms that drive people toward help. Depression, anxiety, relationship chaos, self-sabotage. These are painful enough that people eventually seek something. The golden shadow produces a different and more insidious symptom. It produces a life that functions, that appears from the outside to be working, that contains none of the obviously dramatic signs of distress, and that is, from the inside, persistently hollow. The chronic low-grade sense that something is missing. The quiet that arrives in moments of apparent success and says, yes, but not this. The feeling in rooms you fought to be in that you are still watching from outside. The life that fits more or less, but that has never quite felt like yours. This hollowness is the golden shadow calling. It is the exiled potential pressing against the interior walls of the life that was built without it. And it will not stop pressing because psychic energy does not dissipate, it accumulates. The longer the golden shadow is exiled, the more urgency it develops. The more clearly it speaks in the language of longing and restlessness and the specific, recurring recognition that there is something in you that your life has not yet reached. Now, the question that every person who has gone this far with the idea eventually arrives at. If the shadow contains all of this, both the dark material and the golden material, both the exiled wounds and the exiled potential, then what exactly is the work of integration? What does it mean in practice to bring the shadow into the light? And why is it so difficult that most people, even after understanding the concept, never actually do it? The difficulty of integration is not intellectual. You can understand the concept perfectly and still do almost nothing with it, and this happens all the time. The difficulty of integration is that it requires you to feel things that you exiled specifically because they were intolerable to feel. The anger that went into the shadow was put there because, in the original environment, feeling it was dangerous. The neediness that went into the shadow was put there because, in the original environment, expressing it produced rejection. The grandiosity that went into the shadow was put there because, in the original environment, it was shamed. The integration of these things does not begin with understanding them. It begins with feeling them, actually physically in the body, feeling the emotion that was exiled and has been waiting in the dark since the day it was pushed there. This is the part no one wants to hear because feeling what was exiled is, at first, overwhelming. Not permanently, the overwhelm is part of the early stage and it passes. But the first encounters with truly exiled material are intense in a way that surprises almost everyone who has done intellectual preparation for the work. The anger, when it finally comes up, is bigger than expected. The grief, when it arrives, is deeper than expected. The neediness, when it surfaces, is more naked and more raw than anything the adult self has wanted to display. And the first response, almost universally, is the response that has always come, the response to push it back down, to contain it, to return to the intellectual frame and analyze it rather than feel it. The work is to stay with it instead of managing it. This is the essence of integration, stated as simply as possible. Not to act it out, not to go express the anger at whoever triggered it, not to become the needy person, not to unleash the exiled material on the people around you, but to stay with the feeling of it internally without immediately converting it back into thought or behavior, to let the exiled part come up and be felt fully and consciously by the adult self that is now large enough to hold what the child self could not. To let it be there, acknowledged, without requiring it to immediately become something else. And to discover, through the staying with it, something that the exiled parts have never had access to, the experience of being held, not by another person, by yourself, by the adult you who can feel the thing without being destroyed by it, and whose willingness to feel it is the first act of integration that has any real traction. As this happens, and it happens slowly in layers over years, something changes in the interior. The pressure from the shadow begins to ease, not because the exiled material has been suppressed again, but because it has been received. The anger that was exiled because the original environment could not receive it. When it is received genuinely, consciously by your own adult attention, the charge it was carrying begins to discharge. Not all at once, but over time, and the energy that was locked in the exile, maintaining the pressure against the door, becomes available. This is one of the most practically significant effects of integration, and it is one that is almost never discussed in the cultural conversation about psychological healing. The integration of shadow material does not just heal the symptoms that the shadow was producing. It returns the energy that was being used to maintain the exile, and that energy, accumulated over decades of suppression, is substantial. People who have done serious integration work consistently report a specific kind of increased aliveness that arrives not when things get better, but when things get more real. When the performance thins, when the persona loosens, when the exiled parts begin to come home and the interior becomes, for the first time, fully inhabited. The increased aliveness is not euphoria. It is not the high of a good day. It is something steadier and stranger, a quality of presence in your own life that you did not know had been absent until it arrived. The sense of being, for the first time, actually home in yourself. Let me say something now about the golden shadow specifically, because its integration works differently from the dark material, and the difference matters. The dark material, when it surfaces in integration, tends to produce discomfort that most people recognize as discomfort. It is heavy, it is charged, it is unpleasant, and while that unpleasantness is the signal to stay with it rather than flee, the unpleasantness at least correctly identifies itself as something that needs attention. The golden shadow is more treacherous. When the golden shadow surfaces, when the exiled potential begins to press on the interior walls and make itself known, it does not produce discomfort in the ordinary sense. Produces longing, and longing is far easier to redirect than discomfort, because longing has the quality of pointing outward rather than inward. You feel the longing and you look for its object outside of you, the career you should have had, the person who represents the freedom you cannot access in yourself, the life that you see someone else living that produces in you that specific hunger that has nothing to do with envy of them and everything to do with recognition of yourself. The longing correctly identifies that there is something missing. It incorrectly locates the missing thing in the external world. And the person who follows the longing outward, without ever turning it around to look at what it is actually pointing at, spends decades chasing objects that satisfy the longing briefly and then reveal themselves as the wrong object, because the object was never outside. The object was always the exiled quality inside. The freedom they were chasing in the other person was their own unowned freedom. The courage they admired in the other was their own unclaimed courage. The creativity they longed for in the other was their own buried creativity, still alive in the shadow, still available, still waiting to be claimed. Claiming the golden shadow is, in some ways, the more difficult integration because it requires a kind of arrogance that the original exile was designed to prevent. The original exile happened because the environment communicated, in some form, that this quality in you was too much, too big, too bright, too threatening, too inconvenient, too outside the range of what was acceptable. And claiming it now, after decades of exile, after years of directing it outward onto people who you have decided are the ones who get to have it, feels like a transgression. It feels like claiming something you have not earned the right to claim. It feels like the exact thing that was punished at the beginning. And the willingness to claim it anyway, to say, yes, this is in me, this is mine, this is the thing that was exiled but was always mine, is the act of integration. Not the willingness to immediately live it fully, the willingness to own it, to stop projecting it, to stop outsourcing it to other people who you have designated as the keepers of the quality you cannot yet claim for yourself. As the claiming begins, slowly, imperfectly, repeatedly interrupted by the pullback to exile, the life begins to shift. Not dramatically, not in the ways the ego expects transformation to announce itself. In small, specific, accumulating ways. The work that was always interesting but felt too presumptuous to pursue begins to feel like yours to pursue. The expression that was always authentic but felt too exposed to risk begins to feel worth risking. The relationships that require you to show up as more than the persona become sustainable, because more of you is now available to show up with. The longing, as the exile ends, transforms. It stops pointing outward toward the people who are living what you could not live. It turns inward, toward the emerging version of yourself that is, finally, beginning to live it. And the specific quality of that inward-turning longing, the recognition of yourself in yourself, rather than in the mirror of others, is the feeling the depth tradition has been pointing at across every culture and every century when it talks about becoming who you are. Not who you were told to be, not who you performed yourself into being to survive, not who you decided to become on the basis of what the environment could hold. Who you are, the specific, peculiar, full and strange and complete thing that you have always been and that the shadow has been preserving in exile all this time. Preserved imperfectly and at great cost, and with consequences that have run through your life like a fault line. But preserved, still there, still waiting for the day you were ready to look at it without flinching. Still carrying the energy of everything you were too young to be when it first had to go underground, and now old enough to receive. If something in this reached a place that is usually too deep to reach in an ordinary conversation, do something now. Write in the comments these 4 words. I'm ready to look, just that. Because putting it in language is the first act of turning toward the shadow rather than away from it. And if this video moves something in you, give it a like, not for me, but as a small signal to yourself that you heard the call. The next video takes this further, into the specific practices that make integration real rather than theoretical, and into what happens in the relationships around you as the shadow begins to come home. It is more important than you know. I will see you there.